The man has to be very spiritually connected to God, and he has to be coming from a place of joy and grace and kindness and love. But what ends up happening is sometimes there's no nuance to these conversations, and there's these just like red pilly type things where men are saying like, woman must always submit, woman must be quiet, she must do what her husband says. And then it's like he hasn't done his own self-work. He's actually kind of a mean guy. He's kind of scary, and he's not someone that anyone wants to submit to, right? He shouldn't be having authority over anyone. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Ancient Intelligence. I'm your host, Anya Shack, and today I'm just going to bring y'all in to a couple of different rabbit holes that I've been going down this week, and we'll just see where this goes. I am really interested in like understanding the rightful hierarchy and status and that relationship between men and women. And I've been researching a lot of things this week, and I still have a lot of questions. But yeah, I'm just going to kind of take y'all into some of my thoughts and perspectives, and also still many questions that are unanswered around this. And this really stems from this real clarity I got this week as I was listening to things, as I was reading. And there are just these three things I'm super interested in, right? I'm really, really interested in how can men and women like be in love with each other, live together, and find ultimate harmony with each other. Like, what is the most harmonious way that we can be together, macro and micro? Okay. And this feeds into number two, which is for that to happen, we've got to really understand what's in the best interest of men, what's in the best interest of women. And for me, that's why I'm like, I'm so sick of the terminology women's rights. Like I'm sick of it. It's not effective. It's not needed anymore. I have all my rights. And it just becomes this buzzword that's kind of meaningless. And what's way better is women's interests, right? What's in the best interests of women? And right away, when you even make that switch, suddenly things get softer and more connected and more holistic, right? And number three, this is something that I'm really been just getting into the last year or so, thinking about how theology plays into this. Like, there's no way in hell we can have these conversations about men and women, especially from a Western perspective, without being very rooted in the Old Testament, at least, right? With like Judeo-Christian ideas and how people lived and how things came to be based on the Torah or the Old Testament, also the New Testament as well, and Christianity and how that plays into things. So these three things are all very interesting to me, and how to put them all together is something that I'm going to be focused a lot on here on the podcast. And I'm also fascinated by pagan cultures, different tribal rituals and traditions, and just things that are ancient, so that we can really come to a more holistic understanding of what we need, without the modern like distractions and sometimes just very unhelpful and harmful ways that we kind of block ourselves from our humanity. So that's really important to me. So I'm going to get into it. I discovered, what's her name? Christine de Pizan. Okay, I was reading about Christine de Pizan, which is an Italian-born French court writer for King Charles VI of France. Okay, and apparently this was the very first female writer getting paid for her money. So after her husband's death, she became the court writer, and she was writing prose and poetry, and she was made a living off of her writing. And so what she really tried to do was bring to light women's interests, like I said, what women care about, what she cares about, like her expression. And I will tell you guys, like, I don't care who I talk to, so many women that I talk to that are in my women's circles and just in my community, like women really want to express themselves. We really, really do. It's very, very important. So if that's a general interest of women, how do we find that harmony with men, right? And it's a really big question to talk about, especially when you start thinking about traditional roles and what women should or shouldn't be doing. There's so many different conversations around that, right? And what I've also found is when we talk about hierarchy and status and who should do what and who has authority, who doesn't have authority, all these things, a lot of the misunderstandings that we have are straight up nomenclature. They're just nomenclature problems. They're issues around wording. And it's like we're misinterpreting words. And I think there's a really great example. So Christine de Pizan, the reason I'm bringing her up is because she wrote something that basically alluded to in Genesis when Eve was made from the rib of Adam, right? She wrote in her writing, she wrote, Eve wasn't made from the head of Adam to rule him. Eve wasn't made from the feet of Adam so that he would rule her, or that, she would be this like subordinate to him. She was made from his side so that she would be his counterpart, walking with him side by side in his life. Super beautiful interpretation, right? Very beautiful interpretation. If you think about, I heard actually on a podcast I was listening to Louise Perry, who I adore. She wrote the book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution. She was talking about an old feminist magazine, Second Wave magazine, from like the 80s or something, that was called Spare Rib, right? So that magazine obviously is making a joke around how like spare rib, like a woman is nothing. A woman is just a spare rib. She's being treated as if she's this afterthought. She's not that important, right? Whereas this woman, Christine de Pizan, the same lines in the Bible, the same lines of Genesis, she's interpreting it in a completely different way. And I think that's really, really important interpretation. And so I always find when people get really heated when they hear like one line, or they hear one phrase, or they read one thing someone wrote and they're just like, oh, I can't stand this person. They're wrong. I don't believe what they're saying. It's like you're interpreting something and you're probably missing a lot of what their intention is. And so I think there's a really beautiful thing. I'm going all over the place. This is how my brain works. So I'm bringing y'all into my fun, creative research world. And I love this. And that's why I'm here. It's, those three things that I mentioned that are really important to me, and learning and curiosity and being able to put things together. That's my creativity, and taking things from different places. And so like as a woman too, like for me to be able to express, this is a beautiful part of who I am. And so I'm really grateful to be able to do this, and to want to do this, right? It's like me expressing that. And I like desire for every woman to feel that, whether it's baking jam and bringing it to her neighbors, right? Because she's expressing her creativity through her jam. So anywho, all my tangents. I was listening to something else, and basically there's this Danish writer who's more of a scientist than a writer. He's actually very technical. He almost like should have been at MIT, but his name is Tor Nørretranders, and he wrote the book called The User Illusion. And he talks a lot about like bandwidth of our brains and our consciousness and our capacity to know and speak and think. And he like makes something that is so ethereal very scientific, which is super cool. But there's a paraphrase quote of his that really struck me deeply, especially about what I was just saying around taking one word from someone or one line and just thinking, oh, wow, like I hate this person or I love this person. It's like, there's so much more, So the bandwidth we have for feeling is much bigger than the bandwidth we have for knowledge. And the bandwidth we have for knowledge is much bigger than the bandwidth we have for communication. This means like we feel so much more than we know, and we know so much more than we can actually say, right? I went to a concert this past week. One of my favorite artists, I am very obsessed with Majid Jordan, like just love these two. It's Majid, the singer, Jordan, the like electronic musician guy. And they're from Toronto, and I love their music. And a friend of mine the next day was like, how was the concert? And I was just like, I don't know. Like I couldn't do it. I couldn't take all of the nuanced layers of feeling that I had and break them down into words that I could communicate, right? Because I have so much feeling about this concert. It's just layered. I can't even explain it right now. And that is how everything is, right? That's how every writer is. What you see from a writer is a small percentage of what they must have been feeling. And I think that's just a really important thing to remember. Think about any argument you've ever been in with anyone. Like truly, think about especially like men and women as they're misunderstanding each other and miscommunicating. It's always like, I can't believe you said that. What did I say? Oh, that. Oh, well, that's not. How did you think I meant that? Oh, this is the way I thought you meant it. Oh, well, that's not what I meant. Right? That's the basis of so much misunderstanding. And it's just so interesting because we can take that and we can round this back to what I was getting at the beginning of this. And what I really want to talk about a little bit here is a little introduction is a couple of words that are very buzzwordy and that make people feel uncomfortable and that just don't capture the full breadth of what might be behind these words, right? For example, two of these words are hierarchy and patriarchy, right? These words are buzzwords. You hear them and people don't even want to talk to you anymore. They're just like, oh, no, like hierarchy is bad, patriarchy is bad. All of these things are super bad. And then you start to understand, like, okay, so let's dissect hierarchy a little bit. Like, let's figure out, is there a hierarchy between men and women? Should there be a hierarchy? What is the purpose of a hierarchy? Is it in the best interests of men and women to be in a hierarchy with each other, right? So if you ask yourself, okay, a hierarchy is defined just super simply a system or organization in which people or groups are ranked one above the other according to status or authority. Okay. That sounds bad, right? It sounds like status, authority. But then you think about like who you want to be in authority, and suddenly it changes depending on the circumstance and depending on the situation, right? So if we're talking about how Eve is the counterpart of Adam, and we're talking about how, there's another phrase in the Bible that I think is just really beautiful. It's the first words that a human being really says. The first words that Adam says is, "At last, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh," right? So when he looks at her with awe and wonder, right, he gets to have true communion with with this counterpart that God has created for him, right? And then you think about, what does it mean to be in a hierarchy? What does it mean for Adam to be the authority over Eve? Well, you could take it as a bad thing, or you could take it as something that gives her covering, right? Because think about like when shit hits the fan, like the Titanic, all things are terrible, like everything, something bad happens, we're in a crisis. Usually the men are, as the authorities, they're the ones that are kind of just like acting as the boundaries, the enforcers. They're the ones that are guiding people, and they're also the ones that die first, right? They're the ones that stay back. They're the ones that help women and children out of the situation, and then they're the ones that stay back. It's like, obviously with great authority comes great responsibility. So there's this notion of like, okay, if women are saying, I want to be completely equal, men and women are completely equal and there, no one's like dominating or submitting to the other, then you ask yourself, like, if that were the true nature of humans and what we actually want, you wouldn't have like BDSM stuff, right? Like that stuff wouldn't happen. You wouldn't have movies like The Secretary, which I think is a beautiful movie with Maggie Gyllenhaal, showing like the beautiful underbelly of a dom sub relationship in which the two people really, really find this love for each other. And she really submits to him, and he's dominant, like he's the dominant over her. And it's like, if that weren't kind of like a natural thing that we wanted, then it wouldn't come up in other circumstances, right? And so I just think that it's like a really interesting thing. And then you ask women, like, what do you want? What do you want from a man? Like, what do you really want from a man? And they always say, like, I want him to have my back. Like, I want him to hold me down. Like, I want him to have my back. Like, they all say that. They all say that. every time in different like languages and different meaning in different words, And I think if you want someone to have your back, then they've got to have authority over you. It's the only way that works, right? Because it's almost like you can't have two type B people like working on a project together, right? There's usually like the type A person and the type B person, and they're both really important in the scenario, like the work scenario. I know some couples that are both type B people, and like it's just very strange. Like they never leave the house, they never do anything. Their kids are always like a mess. Like there's never like structure and boundaries and organization. And so it leads me to thinking about, can Adam being the authority over Eve be a really beautiful thing for Eve, right? Can it be something that empowers her, something that's in her best interest? Just to use that as an example, obviously apply that to to your situation. And I think it's just what happens when he is the authority and she's submitting, right? There's a really good conversation about that. Now, what I don't like, and I've seen in some of these like super manosphere weird things that people post online, a woman should be like quiet, docile, like ultimately submissive. And again, that submissive part makes sense to me, but like quiet, docile, like no one can see her, no one can hear her. That's weird to me. That doesn't make any sense because that's not in the best interest of like female expression, right? That also doesn't really make that much sense to me. There's another really cool interpretation. I was listening to Abigail Favale, a Catholic woman, who was giving her interpretation around why the devil snake asked Eve to eat the fruit and not Adam. And a lot of people will say that, oh, it's because, women are dumber and easier to manipulate, right? And she says, actually, no, there's a lot of wisdom in how that went down because the devil knew that the woman was actually the more influential one, right? Bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. She is his counterpart. And she comes to this earth and gives him this like awe and wonder, like, oh my gosh, woman, this divine creature. She's also very influential, right? In those BDSM environments, people talk about this all the time. I've heard so many people say, like, it's the submissive that has the power, not the dominant. You really have to let go of a lot to be able to submit in that way. Now, I think what a lot of people miss when they're talking about this, and this is that nuance that gets really, really missed, is like the man has to be very spiritually connected to God, and he has to be coming from a place of joy and grace and kindness and love. But what ends up happening is sometimes there's no nuance to these conversations, and there's these just like red pilly type things where are saying like woman must always submit, woman must be quiet, she must do what her husband says. And then it's like he hasn't done his own self-work. He's actually kind of a mean guy. He's kind of scary, and he's not someone that anyone wants to submit to, right? He shouldn't be having authority over anyone. And not to mention people's individual traumas and how they affect them, and just like the abuse and the violence that can occur in those types of environments that are so harmful to everyone, especially women, right? Like, again, like I love women. Like I want the best interests of women to be upheld. And I know women want strong men. And I know when we say that, what that actually really means is there's got to be some sort of understanding that there is going to be an authority there. There is going to be a hierarchy there. That doesn't mean it's a bad thing, right? Hierarchy is not a bad thing. Authority is not a bad thing. A lot of people love authority. A lot of people, I mean, we can talk about the father-daughter kind of like dynamic, sexual dynamic that goes on. And I don't mean father-daughter, I mean like the daddy dynamic, where the daddy good girl dynamic, right? That goes on in so many relationships, right? Because there is a desire for authority. There is a yearning and craving for boundaries. There is this desire that women have. Now, in that, it is I believe, and this is what I'm coming to, and again, this is like a big question. Like, do you guys agree with me? In that authority, it is really his responsibility to help her flourish and be her best, most expressed self. That's the ultimate harmony, right? Like that's the ultimate desire that I know a lot of women have. Like, that's what it feels like is exciting. And that's why for me, it's like I discover someone like Christine de Pizan, who is writing for the king. And I, I think to myself, it's like when a man sees a woman's passion and interest and sees that, oh, she's kind of obsessed with the thing, right? Like for me, like I love it when a man will ask me like, oh, tell me about what you're researching this week. Like I want to hear about it. Like I know how passionate you are about certain things. Let me have it, right? It's like, oh, that's so exciting. And I just think that a lot of men underestimate the need women have to be fully expressed in that way. And it really is to some degree part of their responsibility once they're in a relationship for him to kind of help her be expressed in that way. And I think it's a beautiful thing that can occur. And so when we talk about nomenclature, it's like, okay, why is authority a bad thing? And then you talk about patriarchy, right? Let's get into patriarchy. So people hate the word patriarchy. I have another video where I talked about patriarchy. It's interesting because this idea of being ruled by fathers, that's what patriarchy means, okay? And so people hate this idea. People don't want to be ruled by fathers. People want women to have agency and they want women to have their voice heard. And I completely agree with this as well. And then we start to go back into the nomenclature, right? So I was reading this as well. So hold on. There's this little bit that I picked up from something that I was writing. Okay. So basically, Aristotle was writing that the relation of men to women is ruler to ruled. Okay. Woo, scary word, ruler and ruled. Like, it's crazy. It's just immediately people are upset about that. But the etymology of the word ruler, okay, it comes from the Latin regula, meaning straight stick bar ruler. So like an actual ruler, like I don't have a ruler next to me, but like imagine this is a ruler, like a straight line. What it actually means, it means is just like leading according to a guiding pattern or model. It literally just means if this is a ruler, that means that I can draw a straight line. Without the ruler, my line's all like this. And that's the whole beautiful thing, right? If a man's going to be the straight line, then a woman can beautifully run her line along his rulership. And so I think we have to remember like ruler sounds mean and bad and scary and like the evil king, but really it's just a guiding pattern or model. It's the same as women not wanting to pick restaurants, women not wanting to decide, things, especially in the beginning of dating, women wanting men to say, hey, I'd really like to take you out on a date. How about Wednesday at 7 p.m.? How about that Italian restaurant on whatever street? Wow. Yeah. You just guided me. You just guided me there. So cool. I love that. That's so nice. And then at the restaurant, asking about my passions and my life and the things I love to do and all these things, you're helping me express myself, right? As a man. And now I'm feeling so seen, so guided, so understood. And that in essence is what women want. And so it's this beautiful opportunity for us to take these words that are so charged with negativity and start to understand like what are we like saying? What are we thinking? Where are we coming from? I think these are really, really important things. There are very important average differences, but they're not absolute differences. And I think there are exceptions in every possible direction. There'll always be exceptions, and that's okay. I think that's so important to understand and to deal with. Like we have essentially like three levels of who we are, okay? We have our humanness, both men and women, we're the same. We need to understand the full breadth of our emotions. We have human experiences, attachment to our caregiver, woundings that we've had as children, the way we relate to each other, like who we are as human beings, like the full breadth of humanity, our connection to God, right? We're the same. Then we have our sex differences, fueled by testosterone or estrogen. This make up like 10% of who we are. It's a major thing. We cannot pretend like this doesn't exist. And then finally, we have our individual differences. And in that individual space, we can be who we are. And some of us are going to not fit into these average differences. Some of us are going to be completely outsiders of that, right? And that's totally okay. And we should allow that. A lot of us that are different from the average, we're the most like non-fungible humans, right? We're the ones that, win Nobel Peace Prizes and run, 500 miles without stopping. Like people do amazing things. And if that means they're a little different from the average, that's okay. I think a really beautiful example from something I was listening to, again, I was listening to Louise Perry and Abigail Favale talking, and they're talking about Joan of Arc and how people started on the internet. They started talking about how, like, oh, Joan of Arc was probably trans. And it's like, what an absolute ridiculous projection of like a modern, very confused group of people on a historical woman who exactly was a non-fungible human, a woman who was different, a woman who did not adhere to these average, like to the average, right? She had something different going on. Maybe she was a little more androgynous, right? She was strong, she was powerful, and she accomplished something very important. And to take away her womanhood from her, I think is the ultimate in just horrific things that we keep trying to do. And the more we keep saying that, if you're not this average person, right, you're this like ideal like cowboy, or you're this like Marilyn Monroe type woman, then suddenly you're not even a man or a woman, right? You have to become something else. Like, no, we're men and we are women. And a lot of us have unique, beautiful differences that don't put us in these like very strict categories from like some one idea of men and women from the 1950s. I think that's insane. And we are completely different. And we have different desires and we complement each other in a way that is very beautiful with hierarchy involved. That doesn't mean that the influence that a woman can have in her relationship is gone. That doesn't mean the expression that she has is gone. Again, like I'm so obsessed with a couple of things in the world. And if I was told that I couldn't like research and share and speak about these things, I'd be so upset. And I think that's so true as a woman, right? And so, yeah, I think that's really all interesting. And that's where my mind's been this week. And I'm just so curious to continue to uncover like femaleness and what that means, and then maleness, and how can we do things, have conversations, show each other how much we honor and value that femaleness and that maleness, such that we come together in the same way, that beautiful line, at last, bone of my bones, flesh of my flesh. It's beautiful. It's a very beautiful thing. And I'm excited to continue to be immersed in theology. And yeah, that's it for this week. And so I'm excited to continue. And until the next one, if you found value in what I'm doing here, please help me grow the podcast. And you can do one of two things: either share the episode with a friend or leave me a review on Spotify or Apple. This will help me so much. Until next time.